Alright, today we're taking a look at the Harvard Business School's case study on Paul Levy's taking charge of the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Lessons for Organizational Leadership and Management. So the case study provides a history of how the financial problems of the hospital arose. And they really began with the merger of the Beth Israel and the Deaconess Medical Center. And it begs the question, why did they merge in the first place? And it was basically due to an emerging business model in the Longwood area of Boston to grow hospital market and gain influence with insurance companies. And the first two hospitals to do this was the Brigham and Women's and the Mass General, which merged to form the Partners Healthcare System. And this sort of put a lot of pressure on the Beth Israel to do a similar merger, and they ended up merging with the Deaconess Medical Center. But there were major differences between the two mergers. And while the Brigham and Mass General had a generally successful merger, Beth Israel and the Deaconess did not for a couple reasons. Number one, the merger was led by Mitch Rabkin, who was president of the BI, so there was a unbalanced authority because BI leadership was given more leadership positions. And the Beth Israel Deaconess focused more on the clinical physical integration versus administrative integration, which was really what was going to garner the most financial benefits, was to focus on the business end of things. And that's what Partners Healthcare They focused on the back end of things to improve their position with insurers who were negotiating insurance contracts. And Beth Israel Deaconess continued to push for the cultural integration, which met with a lot of backlash and resistance. And so their financial woes arose because basically they weren't focusing on that back end, and they had a poor strategy with their practice plans, and they continued to lose millions of dollars over a 4-year period, over $50 million in 98, 99, 2000, 2001. And this is all underlined by other issues within the healthcare system. So they formed the care group when the merger happened, and this kind of made this shared the financial responsibility for everyone for the debt of all the hospitals. So if one hospital was doing bad, everyone was doing bad, regardless of how well they were doing financially. So there's numerous attempts to fix the problem. There was failure of the hospital's leadership to reverse financial losses through various business approaches. The care group and the hospitals within the system met to discuss possible solutions, hired consultants to create a plan, but they failed to carry through due to pushback from the doctors, failure to execute, and could not effectively make decisions, as can be seen through the example where Paul Levy offers to house a 400,000 square foot Harvard research facility on their real estate, which would have been a very lucrative opportunity, and they just failed to act on it. They couldn't get their stuff together. So after hiring numerous consultants, it was clear that everyone knew what to do, but they couldn't get it done, and that was obviously because they had some management issues. And they came up with this one plan that really just didn't have the benefits for the hospital that it could have, and it was deteriorating the quality of care by eliminating their obstetrics unit, which delivers upwards of 5,000 a baby a year and is actually really well known to the community. So this flawed plan raised the issue of who was in charge of the Beth Israel, and it brought to light that the care group CEO was actually the CEO of the Beth Israel Deaconess, and so eventually that CEO hired a president for the Beth Israel, but the CFO and the COO were still reporting to Jim Reinerson, who was the care group CEO, which resulted in a very ineffective organizational culture and did not improve on their governance issues. So eventually, board members of the Beth Israel Deaconess pleaded with John Hamill, the chairman of the care group board, to remove Reinerstein, and they appointed Bob Meltzer, the Beth Israel Deaconess chairman of the board, as the interim CEO of Beth Israel. And Paul Levy was asked to be on the steering committee. He up until this point was the chief operating officer of the Harvard Medical School. Well, he still is at this point, but and they're affiliated with the 17 hospitals within the Longwood area, but they don't own any of them, and they don't manage them. It's just an affiliation. So Levy is asked to be on the steering committee, and it's very clear to him that it's not medicine and healthcare issues plaguing the hospital; it's management and business issues. So, a lot of the board members ask him to apply for the job, and he gives these preconditions, and he says, "I want the board members to stay out of day-to-day operations. The board needs to be shrunk down to 15 to 8 members, and he needs to be in position by first week in January to actually get the job done." And so, he's not even hired, and he's demonstrating his leadership capabilities in an initial assessment of the hospital needs. So one of Levy's first meetings is with the Attorney General, who communicates the fact that Beth Israel Deaconess is not carrying out their fiduciary responsibility due to, as can be seen, through all the financial losses. So as the person who oversees charities, the Attorney General basically gives Levy an ultimatum. If you can't turn around the hospital will be sold to a for-profit institution, and to maintain the beds in the area, and the revenue from the sale will be used for healthcare research. And Levy utilizes this intense amount of pressure to define goals for the recovery plan. And he shares this threat openly with staff. He doesn't hide it. He makes it well known that the hospital would no longer be affiliated with Harvard if it's bought by a for-profit institution, and the hospital's doctors would no longer be considered Harvard professors. So in this case, Levy uses oversight agencies to influence to his advantage. And so the threat is real, and the goal is defined, which is actually a good thing. So in his first couple weeks on the job, the Hunter report, which is a consultant report, basically, evaluating the state of the hospital and what the hospital needs for recovery, is released, and Levy makes that public to all the staff, and including the part about the recommendation for 500 to 700 layoffs. And he acts on that recommendation, and the job cuts are implemented, but the blow is lessened with open communication and reinforcement of inclusiveness and solidarity by requesting feedback on the report to incorporate into the recovery plan. And he releases the recovery plan to staff and asks them to sign on and support. So he really, really emphasizes inclusiveness and their involvement in this process to save their hospital. So far, Levy has effectively set goals for the organization as a whole. He wants to keep the hospital an academic medical institution. He's instilled a sense of inclusiveness, motivating workers towards goals through emails and updates to staff and direct interaction. He begins to create a strong organizational culture by instituting a shared meeting among staff, and he's demonstrated a strong commitment to mission and hospital values through his emails to staff, and he's very communicative with the staff. One of the first things he does is, because he knows it's a problem for the hospital, is he addresses pushback, and an example can be seen with his billing task force wanting to implement an idea of implementing the split bill mechanism to increase department revenue. And despite suggestions to do otherwise, he begins with the most resistant department because he knows pushback has plagued the hospital at every turnaround plan. So he knows he needs to tackle this head on, and he doesn't let it hang over them. He just addresses it. He also works to define roles. In the instance, the chiefs appointed to positions based on academic credentials, and he sees that they're not appointed based on their clinical or administrative credentials, and he sees that as an issue because he's basically saying, like, these people, they're put in management positions, but they don't necessarily know how to manage. So he's creating a way to hold them accountable by making them explain their budget variance, on a monthly basis to their managers, and he sees the importance of this because he sees how important the clinical side needs to run. How important it is for the clinical side to run well, to generate money to support research and to support academics. And he needs to train the chiefs to think of themselves as managers. He also set standards for his management team through email. He describes as dissatisfaction with their work on a number of issues. He was blunt. He didn't attempt to hide his anger. In this case, the CFO responded. The COO does not, and he really takes that as an unprofessional response and really sets the stage for her dismissal. And he gets some feedback from the chief of services, and he was saying how he didn't necessarily approve of what he did, and Levy responds by saying, well, it doesn't really, this is the chain of command, this is how it works. She wasn't working for me, so I needed to let her go. So, along with his consistent emphasis on chain of command, Levy has also insisted on a smaller board of directors to govern more effectively, and this has resulted in the best people for the job being elevated to those smaller number of seats, and in turn resulting in more efficient governing, which is really important at this time when decisions need to be made and the plan needs to be moved forward. So he also takes decisive action in a similar to the COO. The chief of orthopedics was not performing his job to his standards, and he was jeopardizing the emergency room's position as a Trauma 1 status facility because he could not maintain staffing. And he wasn't meeting recruiting standards, and Levy took swift and decisive action, but fair considering the evidence. And another instance of Levy addressing the issues that have plagued the hospital is he continues to emphasize the importance of chain of command to effective governance. He addresses a self-described awkward situation via email to the board where board members were advising staff to carry out plans clearly against Levy's direction and consultation. And he made that very clear that was not going to work under his administration, and that it was very counterproductive to getting the recovery plan going. Another important issue was the Levy addressing the nursing issues because he recognized the importance of nursing in their ability to provide compassionate care at the hospital in a time when the nursing environment was very competitive, and so he was able to address their needs by holding public forums and making them feel valued and listening to their issues. He also addressed the overarching holding group and its relative effect on the health of the hospital. He strengthened the relationships between the leadership of other hospitals and really drove home the point that they relied on each other for business and genuinely wanted to see each other do well. So through these various examples, we can see Levy's leadership skills and how he created a sense of solidarity among the staff at the Beth Israel Deaconess. He practiced open communication, established clear goals, defined roles which enhanced accountability. He strengthened the hospital's organizational culture through clear line of command and expectations and shared meaning. He worked on issues of governance, for example, shrinking the board of directors and addressing the true intentions of the care group. We learned what not to do in terms of leadership from the the merger itself, the Beth Israel Deaconess merger. It moved too fast without a strategic plan and without proof of consultation that this was the right thing to do. It did not build internal support from both sides, but prior to being implemented, because it was so rushed. It was more of a reactionary plan versus something that was well thought out and strategized. It failed to truly institutionalize the change because it was forcing the cultural integration and the physical integration when it just shouldn't, it wasn't going to work. And, before they actually did, they didn't ensure the need for change. It was once again, it was a reactionary decision because they felt threatened and that they needed to be bigger. So what we learned to do is reestablish the organizational commitment among staff, make organizations' problems their own, which he did through the emails communicating the threat that was, from the Attorney General. He established a sense of involvement through open communication, feedback requests, and public forums, and he established operating procedures that reinforce expectations and defined roles, but with a hands-off approach. So he tried not to meddle too much because, he didn't have a healthcare background, but he knew he could set expectations and standards and use the hands-off approach to kind of get people to meet his standards. He strengthened organizational culture by forging consensus among the staff members. In this case, that he forged a consensus of wanting to keep the Beth Israel academic medical institution that was nonprofit. He utilized emotional outbursts via email to indicate when his values or assumptions were being violated. He definitely used email to his advantage and to communicate his feelings and his values, and when people were going around him, or he was a very fair person, but still had very established values and principles. And when someone crossed that, he made it very apparent. So Levy might not have been a perfect leader, but he brought the two hospitals together more than they have ever truly been since the merger. And through the shared goals of saving the hospital as a nonprofit academic medical institution. He ultimately improved the financial outlook of the hospital, and he looked at care groups' effect on the overall health of the hospital. So I think there was a ton to be learned. In my personal opinion, I think Levy was a very good leader. Resources, and thank you.